Hello everyone, welcome to the new video on my channel. This time we will be talking about the game played by my student and his opponent rated around 2200 on rapid on chess.com, so I hope to see a high level of playing. As of now it will be the last video of the playlist, but obviously in the future we will record some new videos. But as of now, without further ado, let's jump straight into this game. Alright, so as you can see, yet again black pieces. Sorry for that. I will try to behave better for the next videos, but let's start. d4, d5, c4, e6, so we have the queen's gambit declined. Usual stuff with the a6 idea, gaining some popularity in the recent years, also thanks to the Magnus Carlsen, who is playing it moving mostly pawns, to be honest. So the main line would be to take on d5, and after knight f3, for example, he plays a move like h6, then c6, so it may seem a little bit strange, and it should look strange, but it's, let's say, playable. Also Carlsen plays it, so there you go. However, in this game we will not jump into this theory, because at this point opponent playing white pieces opted for knight f3 move. It is already not the greatest choice. White should indeed take on d5. In the normal queen's gambit declined, he is in no rush, so perhaps knight f3 is a more commonly played move. But in this variation, knight f3 is met simply with taking on c4, and the idea is that thanks to this move we are preparing the b5 move, so that this pawn chain should be connected well enough to keep the pawn, or at least give it back on our terms. So that's the idea for black in this variation. White didn't know that. I hope that at this level, after this game, he checked the variation out afterwards, and now he knows that he needs to take on d5. But anyway, in the game it's not what happened, so e4 now, opening up the bishop, gaining control over the center of the board and threatening with the c4 pawn, b5, a4 trying to disrupt this pawn chain that I've just mentioned, b4, knight b1, and from taking on c4 up to this point it was pretty straightforward. What should both sides do? At this point black has an option, either to just give the pawn back as of now with the moves like c5 for example, or just still try to fight for keeping the material advantage with the move like bishop b7. Bishop b7 is aimed towards the e4 pawn, and the idea is that there is no obvious way to defend it, because obviously d3 square is taken for both bishop and the queen. Knight d2 does not really work because of some c3 threats, and then the knight would have to go away anyway. So queen c2 seems like the only choice, after which we can jump to f6 and create even more pressure. Yet again, the knight b2 d2 move does not work because of the c3 takes, and even if the queen takes on c3, then we can take the pawn on e4. And if the move e5 is played, we can now push b3 if we know what's going on. The idea behind that move is that we will create the outpost on c2. I know it may sound a little bit crazy, and usually don't go for such stuff if you don't know the theory, but at this level I believe that you should go deep into your opening repertoire, trying to exploit opponent's weaknesses, and that's the move. The idea behind it is that the pawn cannot be really taken, to be honest, because after bishop to d5 the only way for white to play this game would be to go to e2 with the queen, which is not an obvious move. More obvious is the queen d3, after which we can deliver a brilliant move, which is knight c6. The idea behind it is that knight cannot be captured, and if it is, we now just play knight b4 with the attack to the queen, followed by knight c2, the fork, and stuff like that. So as you can see, the outpost, sorry, indeed is working, right? So that's the thing. If you study variations, not only you get the strategic ideas behind it, but some tricks like that, which are just alright, because strategically they are fine, but tactically also you have something up your sleeve. But anyway, After b3, because of this trick, perhaps queen d1 should have been played, after which we can just continue with, let's say, knight e4, then trying to put more pressure to the opponent with bishop before check. The idea is that, okay, the pawn may be gone now, this one is also a weakness, but on the other hand, we have an active piece, active bishop, we will deliver a check with the pressure to the d4 pawn also. It doesn't matter which piece will cover the check, d4 pawn might become a weakness, we may as well take it, etc. So yeah, I don't want to go too deep into the opening stuff, but that's the case in here. So if you know this all stuff as black, you may try to, as I've said, go for keeping the pawn. If you don't know or don't care, don't bother, you can just say, okay, whatever. As of now, c5 move also looks very good. The idea is that we want to put the pressure to d4 and e4 pawns very early with just giving back the pawn. It seems fine. So c5 followed by bishop takes c4 and bishop b7. As I've said, the pressure is growing, and as of now white opted for the move d5. I'm not saying it's a good or bad choice, it is just a choice, I like saying that. The idea behind this move is obviously to close the bishop and go away from the both pressure on d4 and e4 squares. The game will be very sharp now, since there is a high chance of passed pawn being on the board on d5, but at the same time this passed pawn of white will be an isolated pawn, so it's a double-edged sword and we don't know yet who is better thanks to it. But anyway, d5 usually should be met with taking, because the pressure on e6 is growing, so takes. And as of now I believe that white did made a mistake, because he took with the bishop. Why is it a mistake? Basically, what you should have done as white is take with the pawn, so that you keep not only the bishop but also the queens on the board, and with those pieces being undeveloped, black may be struggling at least a little bit with castling there, and you can take advantage of that by keeping the queens on the board and trying to castle quickly yourself, and then placing the rook on e-file or the queen on e-file and rook on d-file. How would that work? For example, knight f6, putting the more pressure to the pawn. In general, this pawn is still lost, so that's why I've said that I don't want to evaluate this move altogether, since the pawn will be lost anyway. It's just the case of how are you going to give it away for black. So in this variation, after e takes d5, knight f6, castle takes, white has two options: either delivering a check with the rook, after which bishop e7 is played, and black are fine, kind of, because after the king is gone, there is no pin there. On d5 there are queens, so our queen is also kind of safe. We have some maneuvers like rook a7, d7, and we are just fine with one pawn up. But very annoying variation is queen e2 check. The idea behind it is that if we try to do it the same way as we did a second ago with bishop e7 after rook d1, the dynamic has changed a little bit, because now the pin is there and there is no clear way for us as black to go away from it. So that would be annoying, and that's how white should really continue if they opted for d5 on the move number 9. So if they went for this variation, then d5 is a good choice. If they didn't, well, I'm not sure if d5 was that great altogether. As I've said, at this point e d5 was kind of a must, because after bishop takes, black can just try to exchange the pieces, create the d5 weakness anyway, and then after exchanging pieces our king should be much more safer. Therefore we will just be pawn up perhaps, and that's basically what happens, because we exchanged a bishop, and it doesn't really matter now if the opponent will take with the queen or the pawn, because even if he takes now with the pawn, now you can just grab on d5 anyway. Those checks don't work, those checks are irrelevant, because as of now there is no pin, because the bishops were exchanged, right? So we as black are completely fine. So opponent in the game just took with a queen and admitted that he was kind of wrong. And you may say that already in here we might have a critical moment, and I defined critical moment in the previous episode, so please check it out. But anyway, I will just repeat myself from the last episode. Critical moment is the moment in which, let's say, the opening line ends and you are out of theory, or many changes happened so that the dynamic in the position has changed a lot. This is the case here. However, we as black still have a clear plan, which is take the d5 pawn. So it's not really a critical moment because our plan is simple. So we develop a knight, grab the pawn, cover the check, and now it's still not a critical moment because without the queens on the board, it's obvious that we don't have to castle at all cost all the time. So even though the castling is possible, f6 with king f7 idea also looks fine, mostly because f6 pawn covers some maybe useful squares for the white knights, and not only that, king on f7 still protects the e7 bishop if that's necessary, and also without the light squared bishop for the opponent, king on f7 feels just safe. So because of that, f6 and king f7 are the moves that should be played with not so much thought to it, and we can define finally a critical moment in here. So what happened in the opening is that we've played the opening that we know, opponent kind of fell into our trap, allowing us to grab a pawn, and after many forcing moves, exchanges and stuff like that, we ended up in this specific situation in which we have one more pawn, but we are underdeveloped and we would like to just make it work and win a game, right? So this is the critical moment and we need to consider many ideas. So strategically speaking, we may try to, first of all, just exchange the bishop, because what are our weaknesses? We have one more pawn. What's the problem then? The problem is c5 pawn, obviously, because not only it's attacked as of now after bishop e3 move, but also c4 square is taken, and because of that, our pawn will never perhaps move forward. If it will never move forward, then it will be always a weakness. I mean, not always, but for the long term, right? So that's our main problem. So not only we need to care about this pawn a lot because it's the pawn that we have up basically, but also we need to try to build our plan for the later stages of the game around this pawn, so that at first not only we are defending it, but then in the future we will be able to somehow push it forward in the end and then make it work to win a game. So the biggest question as of now is to take or not to take. And the answer is perhaps not to take. We don't have to rush anything yet, because obviously there is a pressure to c5 pawn, but it's protected as of now, and there is no clear way for the opponent really to attack it. So what would he have to do? One idea would be to place a rook on c file and then going away with the knight somewhere, but the question is where, because there is no obvious square. I mean, we take away this square, and this square. a5 is possible, but what's the point of placing the knight there? Maybe the point is to attack the c5 pawn, right? But then we as black, if we think about this position, we may say, okay, so we will just develop knight to c6, and then we take away also the a5 square. So the knight has nowhere to jump to really. d2 is an only option, but it's not the most active one, right? So this one option of rook c1 and then jumping somewhere with the knight from c4 does not look as a serious threat to us. What's the other option? The other option would be to maneuver a knight to the b3 square, perhaps from the f3 square, since the c4 knight looks fine there. So knight d2, knight b3, yet again delivering a pressure. So with that in mind, we say, okay, as black, how should we proceed? Basically, because we have this possibility of grabbing the bishop, we may use it as a threat and not use it yet, right? If you have some power, you don't want to use all the, the power at the point that it exists. You may try to just keep it for some later stages. And this is what we should do now. We should just try to develop normally, which would be to play knight c6 or knight d7. I will discover this second option in a second. And then perhaps rook a to c8, rook h to d8. And only then, if opponent is putting more and more pressure to the c5 pawn, then we will have the decision to make, whether or not to take the bishop on e3, because we are in no rush and we would rather finish development instead of just exchanging one of our, our most active piece, right? We don't want to exchange it yet. So knight d7 also seems logical from our perspective, because not only we are developing piece, but also we are doing so to protect the c5 pawn, and also we are not blocking c file to protect it. But yet again, the question is, do we really need to protect this pawn with all our forces? And the answer is probably not. So it depends on your playing style really, and the plan for the later stages of the game that you come up with. Basically, both knight c6 and knight d7 moves are alright, and it's up to you which plan do you consider as a better one. In the game, however, my student went for the immediate exchange. It's not a mistake yet, but as I've said, at this level especially, because the nuances between the players and opponents are so little, you need to be patient yet again, right? I've mentioned patience when I was analyzing even the games at the lower stages. At this stage, for sure, patience is very much needed in order to be able to maintain the tension in the game and then be able to, make it work for you, not for the opponent. Anyway, the exchange happened. Now knight c6 and rook e8. As I've said, the exchange is also fine. Maybe in that instance it worked out even perfectly, but the idea was that you need to consider more possibilities and be able to maintain the tension. What I want to say though is that even though the opponent is rated like 2300, he's lacking some strategic understanding of the position, and later on in the video I will let you know why is that. We as black are kind of happy with the exchanges really, because it's lowering the tension, and it's alright for us because with that in mind perhaps we will be able to activate our king later on if there are no rooks on the board, right? Because as of now it's just extremely hard, and also our rooks have less possibilities than the opponent's ones, because those knights and rooks are protecting so many squares on the open d file, and the rooks also are taking over the e file, so that our rooks really have nowhere to go. So in order to progress, we would like to firstly exchange the rooks and then activate the king. This is the general plan that we may try to implement. So that's what happens. The opponent plays b3, we play bishop f8 and exchange. Obviously the opponent is trying to keep a rook so that he may be able to create some pressure later on, but we still try to exchange it, right? And if now opponent goes away from the exchange, we have the d file, because after exchanging the one rook, this square is taken, this square is taken, this one is taken, but without this rook, this square is up for grabs. So that's what we do, that's what we play. Rook d3, attacking the b3 pawn. If the knight protects it, knight d4 is coming, so yet another pressure. Therefore, suddenly white is the one to beg for the rook exchange. After rook e3 though, my student went for rook d1 check, so that the exchange happens in a way that knight is only one. It's a very small difference, but worth mentioning. Anyway, after knight d4, knight d2, I believe we have reached yet another critical moment, because we resolved all our issues from the previous critical moment, meaning that we've exchanged the rooks, we gained the momentum with the rook d3, now knight d4 moves. So as of now, since also the knight has dropped from the c4 square, we need to think about the real plan, concrete plan, how to win the game, because we need to, be sure that we are willing to win the game. And this is the moment when we actually for the first time can, feel the blood and try to go for it. So the biggest problem as of now is that even though the knight has dropped, we still lack the control over the c4 square, therefore the pawn will not be pushed. Alright, so that's why we may try to think about maybe exchange one of the knights for our bishop, because bishop will never take over the c4 square control, right? And exchanging one of the white knights may help us with that. The other way of dealing with the situation would be for sure to just advance the king to at least d5 square, so that he's keeping an eye on c4, and maybe then thinking about this exchange that I've just mentioned, right? Anyway, I would say that activating the king should be the priority, because the knights will never escape the exchange if we will really want to do it. Why? The main reason is that this knight is protecting the pawn, and there is no way for this knight to maneuver around to defend this pawn other than this one. So both the knights are defending the pawn located on the light square from the dark squares, and our bishop is dark squared 1. So with an obvious maneuver like this, we should be at least able to exchange the knights at any given point, basically. So that's our case, and with that in mind, we should be happy with firstly advancing the king to the center and maybe then trying to exchange those knights. But my student opted for the first option, meaning that he firstly played g6 with the idea of bishop h6. And it's all fine if you will still fight for the c4 square. It's the square that is most important one throughout the whole game. So as of now, bishop h6 not only threatens with the exchange, but also with just grabbing the pawn because of those pressures, right? So knight e to f3 was played in order to exchange the knights with hopes of then getting back to d2 when the king is there, for example, right? So the king advances and either the king keeps an eye on c4 or the knight, but the idea is that white is too slow. At this point, we should just go with king e6 immediately, because the white king is not on time. We can deliver the c4 push, the one that we were hoping for through the whole game, and win the game easily, because we create a passer, we have the activity, so it should be easy peasy to win. But my student opted for bishop h6 first, trying to cut away the knight, but the knight was never coming to the c4 square anyway, to be honest, because if he wanted to go like this, then the problem is that we can just still continue our push towards the b3 weakness. So in that moment, let's say, we may say, okay, well, now the knight protects the c4 square, the b3 square, what to do? We have such trick. Simple as that. Even if this trick does not exist, even if I'm wrong about it, it does not matter, because what matters is that the king is so active that usually we would win this game even without having a pawn advantage. Maybe I'm over exaggerating a little, but I hope you get my point. So that's what I guess my student missed. That's why he went for the bishop h6 first, trying to cut away the d2 square for the knight. But the drawback to this solution is that as of now, white king is just on time to cover the c4 square. And yet again, this may be considered as a small critical moment, because, okay, we've got our king to the center, we've cut away the knight of jumping to d2, we need to think about what to do next. And the problem is that, let's say, computer evaluates this position as a winning one, +2, +3, whatever. From the human standpoint, it's not that easy. Why? As I've said, this is the pawn that is our advantage. We cannot push it as of now because it will be lost. Those pawns are on the light squares. We have dark squared bishops, so we don't have a clear weakness to attack. We cannot use our advantage to make even bigger advantage because we cannot push the pawn. So there is no clear way to deal with the situation. What the opponent can do is basically just jump with the knight, as of now at least, back and forth, and ask us a question. How are you going to progress in this situation? So the idea is that from the human standpoint, really the previous moment was the last one to win effortlessly, meaning that king e6, king d5, c4 was the idea. As of now, it's not so easy to win. So don't be fooled by the stockfish. Yet again, I will tell you that evaluation in this moment does not differ a lot from, let's say, this moment. I guess I haven't checked, but the idea is that in here, from the human standpoint, is much easier to win. So basically, the idea, the only one, is to indeed push c4 and just sacrifice a pawn, but in the good moment. So as of now, my student, sorry, was not aware of that, so they just continue, playing the moves on the king side. I'm not getting into too much detail because if the exchanges are happening in a way that the structure is kept a normal way, let's say, so no passers, no stuff like that, it's not that relevant, at least for today's video, obviously. Anyway, the idea would be to perhaps at this point play g5, not bishop g5 but pawn to g5, which is counterintuitive, but that's what computer suggests. The idea is that at some point, because we have limited the knight's option so much, we can just try to outmaneuver him so that at some point we will be indeed able to push the c4 move. How and when? For example, in this instance, if we play bishop f4 move, the bishop cannot be taken because the pawn endgame would be lost for white, and also we cover the c1 square, so it may seem that okay, white can now just go here and there and wait forever and draw, but this is the moment, this is the specific moment that we can deliver a breakthrough, because after c5, king c5, c4, king c5, sorry, we can then try to push the b pawn and then make use of the passer that will be protected by our bishop at some point. We will then get those two pawns with our king because of the activity. If not both of them, then at least a1, and if the a pawn is gone, our a pawn is up and running and stuff like that. So it's quite complicated stuff. For the computer it seems obvious, you know, at here in here is like +3, +5, etc. For me really it's not that easy. So yeah, that's what I had to admit, and the idea is that yet again, at this high level of playing, even being a pawn down does not mean that you should lose. There are plenty of ways to try to fight for a draw, and in here it's a simple way, because you just need to maintain control over the c4 square as white, and your chances are increasing very much. Unfortunately, at some point c4 can be played, but will black find it is yet another story. All it took for white, for black, sorry, to, for example, misplay this game is to play a move like bishop g5, for example. Why is it already a bad one? The idea is that finally the knight can go jump to e1, and the idea is that at some point white will be able to perhaps push f4. How and when? For example, we need to stay on this diagonal because there is not that much else to do. So bishop h6, knight g2, and now if the move like this is played, now f4, then perhaps some check, then the c4 square is totally gone for black. Perhaps white can just take it for himself and stuff like that, and even if he doesn't, because f4 pawn is hanging, he can just go back, threaten with this move, we need to go back, etc. So there are more and more and more drawing chances for white, so that's why this position is very, very hard to really win for us. But in the game something very strange happened, and I've told you before that I will let you know what is wrong with white. So basically, as you may have seen already, he was playing not so greatly as for this level, and even worse, like after king e5 my student opted for this move, perhaps trying to go for it at this side of the board, but obviously after this move f3 might be played, and I'm not sure if that's okay for black to continue really in that manner. Also not f3, but just, you know, grabbing the pawn, grabbing the second pawn, and getting the material on equal terms. But at this point, even though this was a mistake, and this also, because first you are going for the activity and then you are scared, you don't do that. But anyway, and that's what happens when the time trouble kicks in, and at this point the game ended in a draw. And I was like, what's happening? All the time there was this fight over the c4 square, starting from the time that the knight was placed there. Then when we were talking about the critical moment in here, whether or not should the knight stay there or went away from it so that the c file is open, etc, etc. Then we were talking about this specific moment in which black had the opportunity to go for it finally and take over the c4 square and stuff like that. And just during the moment when the c4 square is taken for white, they agree to draw. Why? I have no idea. Not only they have taken the advantage of the c4 square, also they have just knight d3, sorry, as of now, attacking this pawn, protecting this one. It's like black is just lost. We will lose this pawn, perhaps then the other. The control over c4 square is maintained. The knight is jumping on all the light squares. We are lost. So why did the game ended in a draw? I have a theory, and the theory is that the opponent was banned for cheating a few days after the game, and as you saw, he did not show the human understanding of strategy at this level, first of all. Second of all, for example, in this instance, he just agreed to a draw when he was winning. Why is that? My theory is that he was cheating by playing with the second best line of the computer throughout the whole games. That's why, for example, at this point, only this move was a good one, and the second line was taking with the piece, so he took with a piece, right? And it's strategically very wrong. Then at this very last moment, when they agreed to a draw because my student offered it, knight d3 is winning, but all the other moves are drawing, because if you don't play this move now, then black can try to still maintain the pawn by maneuvering the bishop around and defending it, and then there is a draw. So yeah, that's my theory. Let me know what do you think about it, because it seems very strange that opponent was playing with the Stockfish opened or whatever other engine he had used. He maybe on purpose misplayed the opening, then he got to the lost position, then finally when he was winning he agreed to a draw. Very, very strange, but I wanted to show you that even against someone with engine you may try to fight for something, and my student was just on the verge of winning but misplayed a little bit the endgame. Anyway, also the game that I included today, I included it because I wanted to point out that rapid chess on this level online are not the greatest of ways to progress at this point, because I believe that if you are such a great player that you can really play on this level on rapid, you should be a player if you want to not keep it amateur and if you want to progress constantly. My idea for you to progress would be to just play over the boards tournament. There is like no other better way to really progress than play in the OTB tournaments with game analysis, perhaps get a coach if you really are serious about your progress, your development, because as you can see, you may try to play rapid games. They are also very much, developing, but what happens if you happen to play against a cheater, right? I mean, in the bullet, in the blitz parts, there are perhaps less cheaters at this high level, because you would really need to either have a perfect algorithm or whatever program they are using, I don't know, or you would have to show at least some understanding of chess and then add the engine to it. In rapid games, it's a little bit more easier, because you have much more time to just look at the computer, and even if you don't have any program running or on some algorithm to use, you can just simply have the other screen opened, the tablet, the iPad, whatever, just move the pieces there, and then there you go, you have the answer. If you don't want to be known about, you just play the second line all the game, and then you wish that you will not be caught. But as I've said, the player was caught. My theory is that he was playing the second line. You may try to check the game on your own, and let me know your thoughts around it. And yeah, that's that. I hope you liked this game particularly, but also the whole playlist. We had, I guess, 7 or 8 videos as of now, so plenty of knowledge. And with that, I thank you for those videos. As of now, I am waiting to create new ones for you. Let me know in the comments if you have some suggestions about some playlists, about some speedruns, openings. I want to know all the good stuff from you. I hope to record some videos about it. Let's cut it here. Thank you very much for watching. See you in the next video. Bye.